Hello and welcome. You're welcome to comment your city and the time below. I always enjoy reading them. If you find these stories interesting, please consider subscribing. Let's start tonight's story. I took the job because I needed money fast, and my options had narrowed to almost nothing. The posting was simple: seasonal winter maintenance position, remote highway station, December through March, housing included. The pay was better than it had any right to be for what they described as basic caretaking duties. That should have been my first warning, but desperation has a way of making red flags look like welcome mats. The station sat at mile marker 147 on Route 83, a stretch of two-lane highway that cut through the northern forest like a scar. It wasn't much to look at: a squat concrete building painted utility yellow, a fuel island with two pumps under a metal canopy, a generator shed that hummed like a sleeping animal, and a plow bay large enough for two vehicles. The whole compound occupied maybe half an acre, surrounded by snowbanks that rose higher than my head by the time I arrived in mid-December. Beyond those frozen walls, there was nothing but white silence and the dark stitching of pine trees against a colorless sky. During the day, the station looked merely isolated. At night, it looked erased. The wind came down from somewhere vast and patient, scraping against the building in long, methodical strokes, like something trying to sand it down to nothing. The darkness out there wasn't the comfortable darkness of a city night, or even the wild darkness of a campground. It was the darkness of a place that had forgotten it was supposed to have names and roads and human purposes. The man I was replacing was named Gerald. He'd worked the station for 3 consecutive winters, which apparently made him a veteran. He didn't look proud of that distinction. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep, tired in the bones, tired in the eyes. He was maybe 50, built like someone who'd done physical work his whole life, but he moved through the station like he was walking on ice even indoors. He showed me the basics with the efficiency of someone who'd explained it all before. The fuel pumps were old, but reliable. The office had a space heater, a desk, a cot, a microwave, and a coffee maker that looked older than I was. The generator ran on a timer, but could be manually cycled if needed. The plow bay had tools, salt, sand, chains, emergency flares, and a radio system that could reach state dispatch when cell phones couldn't, which was most of the time out here. "The equipment is easy," Gerald said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "It's the routine that's hard." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer right away. He just walked me through the daily logs, the fuel inventory sheets, and the weather monitoring protocols. Everything was written down, procedural, bureaucratic. It felt like working for the DMV in the middle of nowhere. Before he left, Gerald stopped at the coffee maker and tapped the sheet of paper taped to its side. The tape was yellowed and peeling. The paper looked like it had been handled many times. "Read these," he said. "Read them every day until you don't have to look anymore." The title was written in thick black marker, the letters pressed hard enough to leave impressions on the paper. "Rules for winter nights. Do not improvise." I scanned the list. Some of it sounded like normal safety advice mixed with something older, something that didn't quite fit the tone of a workplace memo. The rules were: if you see headlights in the storm but the road is officially closed, do not go outside. If the radio plays a weather report for a date that is not today, turn the volume down and do not answer. If someone knocks after the generator cycles, ask them to name the station. If they cannot, do not unlock anything. Do not shovel the drift that forms against the west door. Let it stay. If you hear footsteps on the roof, turn on the plow bay lights and wait. Do not investigate. I looked up at Gerald. "Is this serious?" He met my eyes for the first time since I'd arrived. "The station keeps the road alive," he said slowly, like he was translating something from a language I didn't speak yet. "Something out there hates that." He didn't explain. He didn't elaborate. He picked up his duffel bag, walked out to his truck, and drove south without looking back. I watched his taillights disappear into the gray afternoon, 2 red dots swallowed by distance and snow. And then I was alone. I went back inside and read the rules again. They felt absurd in the warmth of the office, with the coffee maker gurgling and the heater ticking and the radio playing a staticky country station from 200 miles away. But I read them anyway, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. The station hummed around me, the generator cycled, the wind tested the windows, and the winter, patient and vast, pressed against the walls like it was waiting for me to make my first mistake. The first 3 days were routine, almost boring. I checked fuel levels every morning and evening, ran the generator test at noon, logged temperatures inside and out, and cleared snow from the main entrance whenever it drifted too high. The station settled into a rhythm. Wake, check, log, clear, eat, check, log, sleep. The silence was heavy, but it was manageable. I told myself the rules were just the paranoia of someone who'd spent too many winters alone. Then the 4th night came, and the storm arrived like it had been personally invited. It started around dinner time, a few flakes drifting down in the floodlights outside. By 8 p.m., the snow was falling hard enough that I couldn't see the fuel pumps 20 feet away. By 10, the world outside the windows had become a moving white wall, snow and wind blending into a single substance that erased depth, distance, and direction. The station became a tiny warm dot floating in an ocean of static. I was at the desk filling out the evening log when I saw the headlights. They appeared slowly, drifting through the storm like 2 pale eyes opening in the dark. They were far down the road at first, just a faint glow diffused by the snow, but they were moving toward the station with a strange, steady patience. No hesitation, no wavering. Just a slow, inevitable approach. I set down my pen and checked the road status board. The highway had been officially closed since 6 p.m. The barricades were up 10 miles south and 15 miles north. Nothing was supposed to be out there. The rule hit me like a hand on my shoulder. If you see headlights in the storm but the road is officially closed, do not go outside. I stood and walked to the window watching. The headlights continued their approach, and I expected them to pass, to reveal themselves as a lost driver or a state vehicle I hadn't been informed about. But they didn't pass. They stopped at the very edge of the station lot, just beyond the reach of the floodlights, where the pavement dissolved into blowing snow. The headlights stayed on, pointed directly at the building, pointed at me, though I couldn't see if there was anyone behind the wheel. The beams didn't waver, they didn't dim, they just stared, 2 bright circles that felt less like illumination and more like attention. I stood at the window for 5 minutes, maybe 10, waiting for movement, waiting for a door to open, for someone to step out and wave, for anything that would make the scene normal. Nothing happened. The vehicle, if it was a vehicle, just sat there in the storm, its lights boring into the station like it was trying to see through the walls. Then the radio crackled. I turned toward the desk. The radio was set to the state dispatch channel, and it had been quiet all night except for the occasional burst of static. But now it hissed and popped, and then a voice came through, calm and professional, like a standard weather update. This is the National Weather Service with an updated winter storm warning for the following counties. Effective November 18th, 2019. I froze. November 18th, 2019, that was 5 years ago. The voice continued, smooth and unhurried, listing counties and expected snowfall totals and wind speeds, every word clear and precise, as if it were a normal broadcast. But the date was wrong. The date was impossibly wrong. If the radio plays a weather report for a date that is not today, turn the volume down and do not answer. My hand moved to the volume knob before I consciously decided to obey the rule. I twisted it down, not off, just down, reducing the voice to a murmur. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. The voice kept going anyway, softer now, but still audible, still calm. And then it said something that wasn't part of any weather script. "You can see them, can't you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement spoken in the same neutral tone as the snowfall, predictions like it was reading a fact from a clipboard. The words hung in the air of the small office, and I felt my skin go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the storm outside. I didn't answer. I didn't touch the radio. I just stood there, barely breathing, staring at the speaker like it might reach out and grab me. The voice stopped. The static faded. The radio went silent. And at the exact moment the radio went quiet, the headlights outside turned off. The darkness that replaced them was absolute. Not the normal darkness of night, but something thicker, heavier. Like the light hadn't just been extinguished, but consumed. The storm suddenly felt closer, pressing against the windows harder. And I had the vivid, irrational sensation that something had stepped right up to the glass and was standing there, inches away, watching me from the other side. I backed away from the window. I turned off the office lights so I wouldn't be backlit and visible. I sat down on the beaten, cot in the corner, and waited, listening to the wind scrape and moan around the building, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Nothing else happened that night. But when dawn came, gray and reluctant, I went outside to check the lot. The snow was smooth and undisturbed. There were no tire tracks, no footprints, no sign that anything had been there at all. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew the rules weren't paranoia. They were surviving. The foil arrived on the 6th day, unexpected and unwelcome. His name was Marcus, a state highway contractor who'd been working on a bridge repair crew 30 miles south when the weather turned bad. He showed up in a county truck just after noon, pulling into the station lot with the confidence of someone who believed infrastructure and good intentions could protect him from anything. He was maybe 40, built thick, with a beard dusted white from the cold and a manner that oscillated between friendly and dismissive. He knocked on the office door, waited exactly 3 seconds, then opened it and walked in without invitation. "You got heat and coffee?" he asked, already unzipping his jacket. I told him I did. He poured himself a cup from the pot without asking, sat down in the chair by the heater, and spent the next 20 minutes complaining about the weather, the road closures, the incompetence of dispatch, and the fact that he'd been stuck out here for a week when he was supposed to be home for his daughter's birthday. I let him talk. Isolation does strange things to people, and I figured he just needed to vent. But when he started talking about leaving, about heading south as soon as the snow let up, I told him he should wait for official clearance. He looked at me like I'd suggested he pray for permission. "I've been driving these roads for 15 years, he said. "I know when it's safe." I showed him the rules taped to the coffee maker. He read them, and I watched his expression shift, from curiosity to amusement to something close to insult. "This is a joke, right?" he said. "Someone hazing the new guy?" I told him it wasn't a joke. I told him about the headlights in the storm, the radio broadcast with the wrong date, and the feeling that something had been standing outside the window. He listened with the patience of someone humoring a child. "Look, man, I get it. You're out here alone, it's your first winter, and your brain starts playing tricks. But this stuff," he tapped the paper, "this is just someone screwing with you. There's no mystery here, it's just cold and snow and bad radio reception." I didn't argue. There was no point. People believe what they need to believe until reality forces them to recalibrate. The storm picked up again as the afternoon faded. Marcus decided he'd stay the night and leave at first light. He made himself at home, rummaging through the cabinets, commandeering the cot, filling the small space with the noise of his presence. I didn't mind. The company was almost welcome, even if he didn't believe me. Then, just after midnight, the generator cycled. It was a loud, mechanical sound, a groaning churn as the system switched fuel lines and recalibrated. It happened every night at the same time, predictable as a clock. The lights dimmed for 3 seconds, then stabilized. The heater paused, then resumed. It was normal. What wasn't normal was the knock that came immediately after. 3 taps. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. Knock, knock, knock. They came from the main door, the one that opened onto the fuel island. Marcus and I both froze, staring at each other across the dim office. The knock came again. Same rhythm, same spacing. Like someone following a script. If someone knocks after the generator cycles, ask them to name the station. If they cannot, do not unlock anything. I stood and walked to the door, my pulse loud in my ears. I didn't open it. I didn't look through the window. I just called out loud enough to be heard through the metal. Name the station. There was a pause, maybe 5 seconds, filled with the sound of wind. Then a voice answered, muffled but clear. Open up. It's freezing. It sounded human. Male. Probably middle-aged, with the strained tone of someone who'd been outside too long. It sounded exactly like someone who needed help. I called out again. Name the station. The voice repeated, a little sharper now, a little more irritated. Open up. Not an answer, just a demand. Marcus stood from the cot, frowning. What are you doing? Someone's out there. They won't name the station, I said, my voice steady despite the cold sweat forming on my back. Jesus Christ, Marcus muttered. He crossed the room in 3 steps, reached past me and threw the bolt on the door halfway open before I could stop him. I'm not letting someone die out there because of some stupid game. Moment the lock turned. The air changed. Cold poured in, not the normal cold of winter, but something deeper, sharper, invasive. It smelled like deep snow and old exhaust and something sour, organic, like wet fur left to freeze and thaw too many times. The wind shoved against the door, not randomly, but with intent, like it wanted in. Marcus pulled the door open 6 inches and leaned forward to look outside. His posture changed immediately. His shoulders went rigid. His breath stopped. That's not a car, he whispered. I grabbed his jacket and pulled him back. I looked through the gap just for a second and saw what he saw. There was a shape out there, standing just beyond the reach of the floodlights. It was tall, too tall, and it had the silhouette of something human, but the proportions were wrong. The arms hung too long. The head tilted at an angle that would have broken a neck. And where the face should have been, there was nothing but darkness and 2 faint points of light. That might have been eyes or reflections or something else entirely. The door slammed shut by itself, not from the wind, not from me. It just slammed, hard enough to rattle the frame and knock a calendar off the wall. The bolt slid home with a metallic snap. Marcus stumbled backward, staring at his hands. His fingers were scraped bloody where they'd caught between the door and the frame, thin red lines welling up slowly. But the blood didn't drip. It beaded on his skin, sluggish and strange, like the cold was deciding whether to freeze it or let it flow. He looked at me, his face pale and slack. What the hell was that? I didn't have an answer. I walked back to the coffee maker and read the rules again, even though I'd already memorized them. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair, cradling his hand, and didn't say another word for the rest of the night. Outside, the wind scraped the walls, and somewhere in the storm, something that had learned to knock and speak and almost pass for human went back to waiting. Marcus didn't leave at first light. The storm hadn't eased, but that wasn't why he stayed. He stayed because he'd seen something his rational mind couldn't process, and now he needed answers the way a drowning man needs air. He demanded an explanation, He demanded proof that what happened at the door was explainable, a trick of shadow and exhaustion, anything but what it felt like. I didn't have explanations, but I had records. The station office had a filing cabinet in the corner, dented gray metal that looked like it had been salvaged from a decommissioned government building. I'd glanced at it during my first walkthrough but hadn't bothered to dig through it. Now, with Marcus pacing and agitated and the storm howling outside, I opened the drawers and started pulling files. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Maintenance logs, fuel delivery receipts, equipment manuals, and outdated road maps. But some of the logs were different. They were handwritten in different scripts, different levels of care by different people across different winters. I spread them out on the desk and started reading. The entries from 5 years ago were meticulous, written by someone named Carla Price. She documented fuel usage, weather patterns, generator cycles, everything by the book. But then, in late January, the tone shifted. The handwriting got shakier. The entries got shorter. One from January 29th read, "Heard knocking again after generator cycle. Did not answer. Saw tracks leading away from the west door this morning. Tracks do not return. Followed the rule. Did not follow tracks." February 4th. Radio played forecast for May 2003. Turned the volume down. Did not respond. It knows I'm listening. February 11th. Something on the roof last night. Followed the rule. Turned on bay lights. Waited. It left, I think. The last entry was February 14th, and it just said, "I can't do this anymore." After that, the log was blank for 3 weeks until a new handwriting appeared, someone named Joel Marchant, who started fresh and didn't reference anything Carla had written. Marcus read over my shoulder, his breath short and quick. What happened to her? I didn't know. I flipped to the next winter's logs, written by someone named Dennis Fall. His entries were terse, almost hostile, like he resented having to document anything. But even he couldn't avoid the strangeness. In December, he wrote, "Vehicle in lot during closure, no tracks, stayed inside, rule works." In January, "Child crying in storm, obvious fake, did not follow, rule works." Then his log just stopped. No final entry, no explanation. The next set of notes were written by Gerald, the man who'd trained me, and his handwriting was careful and controlled, like he was trying very hard to stay calm. I found a loose page tucked into the toise sac of one file, folded and worn like it had been handled many times. I unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map, the lines shaky but deliberate, showing Route 83, the station, and the surrounding forest. There was a section of the road about 12 miles north marked with a thick black line and labeled in capital letters, "Where the whiteout does not end." Below the map, someone had written in small, tight script, "The station is an anchor. It keeps the road alive. The whiteout hates anchors. It hates warmth. It hates routine. It will use anything to make you step outside, to make you abandon the light. Headlights, voices, memories. It learns. It adapts. Do not teach it." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't the paranoia of one person. This was institutional knowledge, passed down through years, written by people who'd seen the same things I was seeing now. I kept digging and found another page, this one stapled to an old incident report. It was a list of previous rules, some of which were crossed out or amended. One of them, struck through with a thick black line as if someone had tried to reject it, read, "If you hear a child crying in the storm, do not follow it. The road does not make children." Beneath the crossed-out rule, someone had written in red pen, "This is inhumane. We have to help." And below that, in different handwriting, someone else had written, "Nathan followed the crying. Nathan did not come back. Rule is reinstated." Marcus sat down slowly, staring at the pages spread across the desk. "This is insane," he said quietly. "This can't be real." but his voice lacked conviction. He'd seen the thing at the door. He'd felt the air change when the bolt turned. He knew somewhere deep in the part of his brain that still remembered how to fear the dark, that the rules weren't folklore. They were documentation. I gathered the logs and maps and put them back in the cabinet, but I kept the rule list on the desk where I could see it. I was beginning to understand what we were dealing with. The threat wasn't a single creature, some monster lurking in the woods. It was the winter itself, the storm, the cold, the whiteout, acting with intention and intelligence. It used the road as bait, used human instincts, rescue, curiosity, compassion, as weaknesses to exploit. It didn't want to kill us, it wanted us to leave. It wanted the station to go dark, the warm anchor to disappear, the road to finally be abandoned. And once we understood that, the rules made perfect sense. They weren't arbitrary superstitions. They were tactics in a very old, very patient war. Outside, the storm continued. The wind scraped and tested, and somewhere in the white void, the thing that hated our warmth waited for us to make a mistake. The Guardian arrived just after dawn on the 8th day, pushing through the storm in a state plow truck that looked like it had survived a war. The sound of the plow blades scraping asphalt reached us before we could see the truck, a grinding metallic roar that cut through the wind like a declaration. I watched from the office window as the vehicle emerged from the whiteout, headlights blazing, orange strobes spinning, snow cascading off the blade in frozen waves. The truck stopped at the edge of the lot, engine idling, exhaust billowing white in the frigid air. The driver didn't get out immediately. He just sat there, door closed, as if he were assessing something I couldn't see. Then slowly he climbed down from the cab and walked the perimeter of the station. He moved with the deliberation of someone conducting a ritual. He checked the corners of the building, the edges of the fuel island, the drift against the west door. He bent down near the plow bay and examined something in the snow, then straightened and stood still for a long moment, looking north up the empty road. Only after this inspection did he approach the office door. He knocked 3 times, paused, then called out in a voice like gravel and smoke. "Station 147, I'm Tom Garvin, State Plow Operations, coming in." Marcus and I exchanged a glance. The man had named the station without being asked. I unbolted the door and let him in. Tom Garvin was in his early 60s, built like a concrete pylon, with a face weathered by decades of winter and eyes that looked like they'd stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. He wore a heavy work coat, insulated boots, and a knit cap pulled low. He stamped snow off his feet with the care of someone who respected thresholds, then stepped inside and closed the door firmly behind him. He looked at me first, then at Marcus, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You both all right?" I nodded. Marcus nodded too, though he looked like he wanted to say more and couldn't find the words. Tom walked to the coffee maker, poured himself a cup without asking, and drank half of it in one long pull. Then he set the cup down and tapped the rule sheet with one thick finger. "You've been following these?" "Yes," I said. "Good." He looked at Marcus. "You?" Marcus hesitated. I opened the door after the generator cycled. Something knocked and I... "Did it get in?" Tom interrupted. "No. The door slammed shut." Tom nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he already knew. "Then you got lucky. You won't get lucky twice." He sat down in the chair by the heater and gestured for us to sit as well. There was an authority to him that made disobedience feel impossible. We sat. "The station is a warm anchor," Tom said, speaking slowly and clearly like he was repeating something he'd said many times before. "It keeps the road alive. It keeps the passage open. There's something out there that hates that. Hates the light, hates the warmth, hates the fact that we refuse to let this stretch of highway disappear. It's old. Older than the road. Maybe older than the forest. We don't know what it is, exactly. We just know what it does. What does it do? I asked. Tom took another drink of coffee. It imitates. It learns. It uses the things we expect, headlights, voices, distress calls, to make us open the door, to make us step outside, to make us abandon the warm places. It wants the station to go dark. Once the station goes dark, the road becomes part of the whiteout. And the whiteout doesn't follow normal rules. Marcus leaned forward, his voice tight. What does that mean? The whiteout doesn't follow normal rules? Tom's eyes shifted to the window, where the storm pressed against the glass like a living thing. It means distance stops working right, time gets loose. People who drive into it don't come out the other side. Or they come out somewhere else. Or they come out wrong. He paused. We lose 2 to 3 vehicles a year on this stretch, most of them during closures. Most of them were never found. I thought about the hand-drawn map, the section marked where the whiteout does not end. I thought about the logs, the people who'd worked this station before me and vanished or quit without explanation. Tom set his cup down and looked at me directly. You've done well so far. You followed the rules. That's the only thing that matters. The rules aren't suggestions, they're not superstitions. They're the only thing standing between you and the drift. The drift? Marcus asked. That's what we call it, Tom said. The thing that imitates engines and voices and knocks on doors. The thing that makes tracks that lead away and don't come back. He stood, walked to the window and looked out at the storm. If you see tracks that lead away from the station and do not come back, do not follow them. That's how it recruits. The word recruits hung in the air, cold and wrong. Tom turned back to us. I come out here every few days when I can get through. I check the station, I check the corners. I make sure the drifts are where they're supposed to be and nothing's been moved that shouldn't have been moved. I've been doing this for 12 years. I've seen people break the rules. I've seen what happens when they do. Hello, Kedet Marcus. If you'd gotten that door fully open, you'd be gone already, not dead. Gone. And I'd be the one finding your truck in the spring with the engine still running and no one inside. Marcus went pale. I felt my stomach twist. Tom pulled on his gloves and walked to the door. Before he left, he added one more thing, spoken quietly, almost like a prayer. The station keeps the road alive. You keep the station alive. Don't teach it your voice. Don't teach it your habits. Don't give it anything it can use. He opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air, then looked back one last time. And whatever you do, don't go outside after dark unless the building is on fire. Cannot then. Think twice. He left, closing the door firmly behind him. The plow truck roared to life, and I watched through the window as Tom drove north, pushing into the storm like a man who'd done it 1,000 times and expected to do it 1,000 more. Marcus and I sat in silence for a long time after he was gone. The rules on the wall felt heavier now, not like warnings, but like commandments. And the storm outside felt less like weather and more like something waiting for its next chance to test us. Night fell on the 9th day like a curtain dropping on a stage, sudden and absolute. The storm returned with renewed fury, wind hammering the station in rhythmic gusts that made the whole building shudder. Snow didn't fall so much as fly horizontally, turning the world outside into a churning white void. The floodlights barely penetrated 10 feet. Beyond that, there was nothing. Marcus and I had spent the day in tense silence, both of us processing what Tom had said, both of us trying to reconcile the impossible with the undeniable. We checked the generator, logged the temperatures, ate canned soup that tasted like cardboard. Routine felt like armor. Then just after 10 p.m. we heard the child. It started as a faint sound beneath the wind, so quiet I thought I'd imagined it. A soft crying, thin and high-pitched, the sound of a young child in distress. It rose and fell with the gusts. sometimes disappearing entirely, then returning clearer, closer. Marcus heard it too. He stood from the cot, his face stricken. "Is that—" "Don't," I said, cutting him off. I walked to the rule sheet and pointed to the crossed-out line, the one written in red. "If you hear a child crying in the storm, do not follow it. The road does not make children." Marcus stared at the words, his jaw tight. "That's insane. If there's a kid out there—" "There isn't," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "You read the logs. You know what this is." The crying continued, and now it was joined by another voice, an adult woman, panicked and breaking. "Please, someone help us, my daughter. Please, we're freezing. Please." The voice was raw with desperation, so convincing, so human that every instinct I had screamed at me to open the door. The woman sounded like she was maybe 30 feet away, just beyond the reach of the lights, close enough to save if we acted fast. Marcus moved toward the door. "We have to check. We have to—" I stepped in front of him. "No. Get out of my way." His voice was shaking, torn between fear and fury and the moral imperative to help someone in need. "Marcus, listen to me. That's not a person, that's the drift. It's using—" The woman's voice cut through again, louder now, more specific. "Please, I can see the lights. Just open the door." And then she said something that made my blood freeze. "We were trying to get to Briarwood. We were supposed to see Grandma Ellen for her birthday. Please, my little girl is so cold." Briarwood, Grandma Ellen. I'd never mentioned those names out loud. Not here, not anywhere. But they were real. Briarwood was the town where I'd grown up. Grandma Ellen had been my grandmother, dead for 6 years, and her birthday was in December. The drift had pulled that from somewhere. From me. From my memory, my mind, my past. It had learned something intimate and specific, and now it was using it like a key. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. Marcus saw the look on my face and froze. "What?" he demanded. "What is it?" "It's not random," I whispered. "It knows things it shouldn't know." The crying grew louder, more insistent. The woman's voice pleaded, sobbed, begged. And underneath it, like a thread I almost couldn't hear, there was something else. A rhythm. A repetition. The words were looping just slightly out of sync, like a recording played over and over with tiny variations. Marcus heard it too. His face shifted from desperation to confusion to horror. That's not right." The crying stopped abruptly. The woman's voice stopped. The storm was suddenly oppressively silent. Then the station radio clicked on by itself. No static, no warning. Just a click, and then a voice, calm and bureaucratic, reading from what sounded like a list. "Nathan Holloway, January 2012. Carla Price, February 2015. Dennis Fall, January 2018. Joel Marchant, March 2019. The voice paused, then continued. "Persons reported missing on Route 83, station mile marker 147. Last known location, station vicinity. Status unrecovered." The voice stopped. The radio clicked off. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then the knocking started. Not at the door, on the walls. Slow, deliberate knocks moving around the building like someone walking the perimeter, tapping with a knuckle at regular intervals. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Moving along the north wall, then the east wall. Circling. Searching. Testing. Marcus backed into the center of the room, his eyes wide. "What is it doing?" "Looking for a weak spot," I said, my voice barely steady. The knocks continued, methodical and patient, and I realized with cold certainty that the drift wasn't just trying to lure us out anymore. It was mapping the station, learning its layout, finding where the doors were, where the windows were, where the bolts and locks were. It was learning how to get in. The knocking stopped at the west door, the one with the drift piled against it. There was a long pause, Then the wind surged, and I heard something like a sigh, low and resonant, like the storm itself had exhaled. The knocking didn't resume, the crying didn't return, but I knew the drift hadn't left. It was out there, just beyond the walls, waiting with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. Marcus sank into the chair, his face pale and slack. "We're trapped," he said quietly. I looked at the rule sheet, at the logs, at the maps spread across the desk. "No," I said. "We're anchored. There's a difference." But even as I said it, I wondered how long an anchor could hold against something that never got tired and never stopped learning. The generator sputtered at 2:17 a.m. I was half asleep on the cot when the sound jarred me awake, a mechanical cough, a stutter in the steady hum that had become the heartbeat of the station. The lights dimmed, flickered, and dropped to half brightness. The heater clicked off. The temperature began to fall immediately, the cold seeping in through the walls like water through a cracked hull. Marcus bolted upright, his breath fogging in the sudden chill. "What's happening?" I grabbed the flashlight from the desk and checked the electrical panel. The generator was still running, but the output was erratic, fluctuating between 70 and 30% capacity. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. There was no mechanical reason for the failure. But I knew it wasn't mechanical. Tom's words came back to me. It wants the station to go dark. Once the station goes dark, the road becomes part of the whiteout. The drift wasn't just outside anymore. It was interfering, sabotaging, pushing. "We need to reset the generator," Marcus said, already pulling on his coat. "It's in the shed. I'll go." "No." I grabbed his arm. "That's exactly what it wants. You step outside, you're isolated, exposed. That's the whole point." "Then what do we do? We can't just sit here and freeze." I didn't have an answer. The temperature was already dropping fast, condensation forming on the windows, frost creeping along the edges. The lights dimmed further and the building groaned under the wind as if it were being crushed. The radio crackled and a voice came through, official and urgent. "Station 147, this is dispatch. We're reading a generator fault on your end. Protocol requires manual inspection of the fuel line. Respond." I stared at the radio. Dispatch didn't monitor the generator remotely. There was no system in place for that. "The Protocol 147, acknowledge. You are required to perform an external inspection. Confirm." Marcus looked at me. "That's dispatch. They're telling us to go outside." "That's not dispatch," I said, my voice cold. The voice on the radio shifted slightly, becoming sharper, more insistent. "Station 147, failure to comply with safety protocol will result in disciplinary action. Perform the inspection now." I reached over and turned the radio off. The voice stopped mid-sentence. Marcus paced, his breath coming fast and shallow. "We're going to freeze if we don't fix it. We're going to disappear if we do," I shot back. Then I heard Tom's voice, faint and distorted, breaking through on a different channel. I turned the radio back on, adjusting the frequency until his voice came through, clearer. "Do not respond to dispatch. Do not transmit. Do not go outside. The station can survive low power. You cannot survive the drift. Stay inside. Do not..." The transmission cut off, swallowed by static. But the message was clear. We stay. We endure. We don't give the drift what it wants. Marcus wasn't convinced. He moved toward the west door, the one with the drift piled against it. "There's got to be another way. If we can clear this door, we can get to the generator from the backside." "Don't touch that drift," I said, stepping between him and the door. "Why the hell not?" "Because the rule says not to." I pointed to the sheet. "Do not shovel the drift that forms against the west door. Let it stay." Marcus's face twisted with frustration. "That doesn't make sense. It's just snow." "Is it?" I asked. He didn't answer, but he grabbed the shovel from the corner, shoved past me, and started attacking the drift. The snow came. away in heavy, compacted chunks, not loose and powdery like normal snow, but dense and deliberate, like it had been shaped by hand. Marcus dug faster, his breath ragged, carving a gap in the white wall. And then he stopped. "Oh, God," he whispered. I moved closer and looked at what he'd uncovered. Beneath the snow, pressed against the door, was a layer of ice. And frozen in the ice were shapes, handprints. Dozens of them, overlapping, pressed flat against the metal like people had been trying to claw their way in or out. Marcus dropped the shovel. The wind surged, pouring through the gap he'd made, and the air that came in wasn't just cold. It was wrong. It smelled like metal and rot and something ancient, and it carried with it a sound like a deep inhale, as if the storm had been holding its breath and was finally allowed to breathe. The station radio clicked on again, and this time it played Marcus's own voice, recorded somehow, repeating the last thing he'd said word for word. "That doesn't make sense, it's just snow." Marcus backed away from the door, his face white. "How did it—" The lights flickered and went out completely. The generator died. The building went silent except for the wind, which now sounded less like weather and more like breathing. We were in the dark. The cold closed in, and somewhere outside the drift pressed closer, patient and inevitable, waiting for the warm anchor to finally go out. The darkness lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like drowning. Then the emergency lights kicked in, dim red bulbs that bathed the office in a bloody glow. The temperature continued to drop. I could see my breath. Marcus was shaking. Whether from cold or fear, I couldn't tell. Then the footsteps started on the roof. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough that I could hear the metal flex under the weight. Something was walking across the row of the station, moving from south to north with the methodical pace of someone searching. If you hear footsteps on the roof, turn on the plow bay lights and wait. Do not investigate. I ran to the switch panel and flipped the breaker for the plow bay. The exterior lights blazed to life, two massive floods that illuminated the bay and spilled harsh white light across the snow. Through the bay windows, I saw the storm glow like a curtain made of static. And across the roofline, silhouetted against the swirling white, I saw something move. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were elongated and wrong, moving in a way that didn't match the rhythm of walking. It paused at the edge of the roof, and for a moment I thought it was looking down at me, though I couldn't see a face, couldn't see features, just a shape that suggested a person the way a scarecrow suggests a person. Then it stepped backward, smoothly, impossibly, and disappeared over the far side of the building. The footsteps stopped. Marcus stood frozen by the west door, staring up at the ceiling. What the hell was that? Before I could answer, the headlights returned. They appeared in the lot, closer than they'd ever been, pointed directly at the office windows. Bright, unblinking. But there was no vehicle beneath them. Just two circles of light hanging in the storm, floating at the height where headlights would be if a truck were there, but nothing else. No shape, no shadow, just the lights. Marcus moved toward the window, transfixed. How is that? The emergency radio channel crackled, and a voice came through, calm and professional, using the exact cadence and tone of the state dispatch operator I'd spoken to during my first week. Station 147, this is dispatch. Road conditions have improved. You are cleared to exit the station and inspect the barricade at mile marker 152. Confirm departure time. It sounded real. It sounded exactly right. But the road wasn't clear. The storm hadn't improved, and dispatch wouldn't send anyone out in these conditions. Marcus looked at me, desperate. Maybe that's real. Maybe they got through. It's not real, I said. You don't know that. Marcus, look at the headlights. Look at them. He turned. The headlights hadn't moved. They hung in the air like eyes, and now I could see something else. They were getting brighter, not gradually. Suddenly in pulses like something breathing. The radio crackled again, and this time Tom's voice broke through, faint and warped. Do not transmit. Do not respond. Do not trust any instruction that sends you outside. Stay. The transmission cut off, replaced by the calm dispatch voice. Station 147, confirmed departure. Protocol requires acknowledgement. I reached over and shut the radio off completely, ripping the power cable from the back of the unit. The voice stopped. The building shuddered. A deep, resonant groan ran through the walls, and I felt the floor shift slightly beneath my feet as the foundation had moved. Snow began to filter down from the ceiling, fine white powder drifting through gaps I hadn't known existed. Marcus grabbed my shoulder. The building is falling apart. We have to leave. We have to... No, I said, my voice hard and final. That's what it wants. It wants us to panic. It wants us to run. The station can fail. We stay. We'll freeze. We'll disappear if we go outside. The headlights moved closer, not driving, gliding. They stopped 10 feet from the windows, so bright now that they hurt to look at, and I realized they weren't imitating headlights anymore. They were just light, shapeless and burning, like something trying to force its way through the glass using sheer intensity. The knocking returned all around the building, dozens of points at once, like a crowd surrounding us and demanding entry. The roof footsteps resumed, faster now, frantic, like something pacing in frustration. And then the radio turned itself back on despite the disconnected power, and the voice that came through wasn't calm anymore. It was angry. Open the door. Not a request, a command. Open the door. Repeated, layered, multiple voices now, overlapping, some high, some low, some human, some not. Open the door, open the door, open the door. Marcus covered his ears and sank to the floor. I stood at the window staring at the lights, feeling the cold bite into my skin, feeling the building shake and groan, and I made the hardest choice of my life. I stayed. I didn't touch the door, I didn't respond, I didn't run, I just stood there in the failing station and refused to give the drift what it wanted. The lights surged one final time, bright enough to burn after images into my vision. The knocking rose to a crescendo, the voices screamed through the dead radio, and then, all at once, it stopped. The lights vanished, the knocking ceased. The footsteps went silent. The storm outside suddenly sounded like just a storm again, wind and snow and nothing more. The generator coughed, sputtered, and roared back to life. The main lights flickered on. The heater clicked and began pumping warm air. The building settled with a tired groan, and the cold began to retreat. I stood there shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib. Marcus was on the floor, staring at nothing, his face pale and slick with sweat despite the cold. Outside, the storm continued. But the presence, the attention, the thing that had been pressing against the walls and testing the doors, was gone. We'd survived, not because we were strong, but because we'd refused to move. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping into the storm like ink diffusing through water. The wind eased, the snow thinned. By 8 a.m., visibility had improved enough that I could see the road again, empty and white and almost peaceful. Tom arrived at 9 with a full convoy, 2 plow trucks, a state patrol SUV, and a maintenance crew. They pushed through the snow like liberators, reclaiming occupied territory. Engines roaring, lights flashing, human noise cutting through the oppressive silence. Tom came into the office first, his eyes scanning the space with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen this before. He looked at the west door, at the melted gap in the drift, at the handprints frozen in the ice beneath. He looked at the radio with the power cable ripped out. He looked at Marcus sitting on the cot, staring at nothing, and then at me, standing by the window with my coat still on and my hands still shaking. "You both all right?" he asked. I nodded. Marcus didn't respond. Tom walked to the generator shed and ran a diagnostic. 20 minutes later, he came back and reported that everything was functioning perfectly. No mechanical failure, no fuel blockage, no explanation for why it had shut down. "It does that sometimes," he said quietly. "The station fails when the drift pushes hard enough, but it always comes back if you stay inside." He helped Marcus to his feet and guided him out to the patrol SUV, where a paramedic checked him over. Marcus was unresponsive, eyes distant, muttering the same phrase over and over. "It knew my name. It knew my name." They drove him south to the hospital. I never saw him again. I heard later that he quit his job, moved out of state, and refused to talk about what happened at the station. The maintenance crew cleared the West Drift properly, documenting the handprints in the ice with photographs that would be filed away in some state archive and never explained. They checked the fuel lines, ran tests, replaced filters that didn't need replacing, and did all the bureaucratic things people do when they need to pretend the world makes sense. Tom stayed until the crew finished. Before he left, he walked me through the office one last time. "You did good," he said. "You followed the rules, you stayed inside, that's all you can do." "What is it?" I asked the question I'd been holding since the first night. "What's really well there?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the road. "We don't know," he said finally. "We just know it's old and it's patient and it hates the fact that we keep the road open. Every winter it tries, every winter we hold." He turned to me. "You held." "Barely. Barely is enough." My contract ended 2 weeks later. I finished the season following the rules, watching the storm, and never once stepping outside after dark. When March came and the snow began to melt, I packed my things, signed the paperwork, and left the station to the next person. I told myself it was over. I told myself I'd survived, learned something, moved on. But the drift had learned something too. I went back to the city, got a normal job, rented a normal apartment, tried to rebuild a normal life. For a while it worked. I didn't think about the station. I didn't think about the rules. I didn't think about the thing that knocked and called and learned my grandmother's name. Then winter came again. It was a normal snowfall, nothing severe, just a few inches that dusted the streets and made everything quiet. I was in my apartment making dinner when I noticed the headlights through the curtains. I looked outside. The street was empty, no cars, no traffic. But the headlights were there, 2 circles of light pointing at my building from where a vehicle should have been but wasn't. I closed the curtains and turned away. My phone buzzed. A weather alert. I picked it up and read the notification. Winter storm warning effective March 15th, 2019. The date was wrong. It was March 2024. The alert began to play automatically, a calm voice reading the forecast, and I felt the cold settle into my chest again. That same cold from the station, from the storm, from the thing that waits in the whiteout. "You can see them, can't you?" the voice said. No longer reading a script. I turned the volume down. I didn't answer. I followed the rule. But I know now that the rules weren't just for the station. They were for anywhere the drift can reach. Anywhere the storm can touch. Anywhere someone opens a door they shouldn't open or answers a voice they shouldn't answer. The station was just the front line. But the war is everywhere, and the winter is patient. It doesn't forget. It just waits. End.